They had him under stage lights like he was the one on trial. 1,000 shareholders packed the hotel ballroom phones, up cameras rolling. The microphone shoved so close to his face he could taste the metal. On the big screen behind him was a blown-up photo Jonah Reeves in a borrowed suit, his arm around a pale woman with a headscarf and an oxygen tube. Lila Hart, billionaire hotel heiress, CEO of Heartline Resorts. The man at the podium jabbed a finger toward Jonah. So tell us, Mr. Reeves, are we really supposed to believe a school bus mechanic just happened to fall in love with our CEO right after she put you in her will? The room buzzed. Someone laughed. Someone else shouted, "Gold digger." Jonah could feel his 11-year-old daughter watching from the side of the stage. He could feel Lila's hand shaking where it clutched his sleeve, hidden just out of view. His heart hammered, but his voice came out low and steady. At 37, he said, "I've buried a wife, raised a kid, and changed more brake pads than most of you have sent emails. I didn't ask for her money. I just didn't walk away when she was dying." The room went dead quiet. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Jonah Reeves did not look like the kind of man who ended up on a stage like that. Most days he smelled like diesel and cheap coffee, not designer cologne. He lived on the east side of Kansas City in a 2-bedroom duplex with siding that had seen better decades. Mornings he was the guy in the reflective vest, leaning into the open hood of a yellow school bus, while kids streamed past him, never wondering who kept those engines from dying on a January morning. By 6:30 a.m., he was behind the wheel driving those same kids along the same cracked streets, waving at the same crossing guards. Afternoons, he slid under buses on a creeper, hands black with grease radio playing old country because the news station barely came in clear. Nights, if the bills were bad, which they usually were, he drove for a rideshare company, his old Dodge minivan scrubbed within an inch of its life to earn a few more tips. He was 37 years old and felt twice that. His wife, Erin, had been gone 3 years. Pneumonia that turned to something worse. Then a blur of ICU machines and a funeral that still played in his head whenever it rained. That left him and his daughter, May. May with the skinned knees and the too big backpack. May, who pretended not to notice when the power bill came in a red envelope. She was the center of his universe, the reason he patched shoes instead of buying new ones, the reason he took every overtime shift, the reason he swallowed his pride when parents complained about arriving 2 minutes late. Jonah's hidden past was simple enough before bus engines there had been human bodies. 10 years earlier, he'd been an army medic, the guy you wanted next to you, when everything went wrong in a dusty place far from home. He didn't talk about that much. Didn't talk about the nights he still woke up hearing distant explosions that weren't there. These days his skills were buried under PTO requests and oil changes. What he had left was stubbornness, a promise to May that he would keep her roof solid and her world steady, even if it meant never asking for anything more. He was under the hood of Bus 24, the night everything changed, Kansas City rain coming down in sheets, his phone buzzing in his pocket with another insufficient funds notification. The dentist wanted $600 for May's cracked molar. The bank account said $41.19. So when his rideshare app pinged at 9:47 p.m., pick up downtown medical center, high fare surge. He wiped his hands on a rag, clocked out, and climbed into the Dodge. 15 minutes later, a woman in an oversized hoodie slipped into his back seat outside Mercy General. She was too thin, too pale, eyes like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. "Riverfront Overlook," she murmured, buckling herself in with fingers that shook. They were barely 3 blocks away when Jonah saw her in the rearview mirror, head lolling, lips turning gray. "Ma'am," he said, already signaling to turn around. His medic brain, buried all those years, snapped awake, like it had just been waiting. No answer. Her breathing went ragged. He swung the van in a hard U-turn tires, hissing on wet asphalt, and pointed it straight back toward the glowing red emergency sign. He didn't know her name. He didn't know she owned half the hotels he'd driven past, dreaming of a vacation he'd never afford. All he knew was that somebody was about to die in the back of his minivan if he didn't move. Rain hammered the windshield as Jonah skidded up to the ER bay, hitting the brakes so hard the van fishtailed. Nurses swarmed instantly, drawn by the sight of a man jumping out of a minivan, shouting for help, while carrying a limp woman in his arms. The next several hours blurred into bright lights, clipped voices, and paperwork he barely understood. He sat in a hard plastic chair, watching doctors rush her down the hallway, feeling that old medic instinct roiling under his skin, wanting to help, but having no authority to do a damn thing. By dawn, they told him she'd stabilized. By 8 a.m., he learned her name: Lila Hart. The woman who had almost died in the backseat of his Dodge was the heiress to Heartline Resorts, a company with hotel towers in half a dozen states. Her photo was all over the lobby television, smiling glamorous, standing beside ribbon cuttings and charity galas. The woman he'd carried in was nothing like that shimmering image. And somehow the quiet gratitude in her eyes when she woke and asked, "You stayed, hit him harder than the whole night." He left thinking that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The mistreatment began 3 days later, on a Thursday morning that smelled like burnt coffee and school bus exhaust, just another day Jonah intended to muscle through. He was tightening the last bolt on a faulty brake cylinder when a man in an expensive wool coat walked into the maintenance bay. The coat alone probably cost more than Jonah's mortgage. His shoes didn't even pick up dust on the concrete. "You Jonah Reeves?" the man asked, ignoring the tools scattered around and the grease on Jonah's sleeves. Jonah stood slowly. People didn't usually speak with that tone unless they already resented you. "I am." The man extended a glossy business card with 2 fingers, as if afraid grease might leap onto him on contact. "Carter Reynolds, Chief Operating Officer, Heartline Resorts." The name hit Jonah like a wrench to the ribs. He wiped his hand on a rag before shaking. "What brings you here?" Jonah asked. "Lila." "Okay." Reynolds' jaw twitched. "Miss Hart is recovering, but she insists on speaking with you again." "Privately." Jonah blinked. "She asked for me?" "She did." Rather emphatically. Reynolds studied him in a way that made Jonah feel like a stain on a white tablecloth. "She lost consciousness in your vehicle. There are legal questions that require clarification." Ah, there it was. Not gratitude. Suspicion. Jonah kept his voice steady. "I drove her straight to the hospital." "So you say." Reynolds' gaze swept the garage, the dirt under Jonah's nails, the peeling safety posters, the rusty toolbox. "Let me be frank. Miss Hart is extremely vulnerable right now. People have already attempted to take advantage of that. We cannot allow—" "You think I hurt her?" Jonah cut in quietly. Reynolds didn't blink. "I think I need to protect my CEO. So if you have intentions beyond what you've stated, now is the time to reveal them." Jonah stepped aside to let a mechanic push a cart past them. His voice stayed low, almost calm, but his heart thudded with old anger from every time he'd been judged because he didn't have money or nice clothes or the right last name. "I don't want anything from her," he said tightly. "I just didn't want her to die alone." Reynolds gave a small, knowing smile that wasn't kind. Men like you always want something. Money. Recognition. A story to tell. Jonah felt something old and instinctive coil in his chest, the part of him that had knelt in sand overseas, pressing his hands into wounds while bullets cracked overhead. The part of him that didn't scare easily. But he kept still. He kept quiet. Because May needed calm. Stability. A father who didn't start fights, especially ones he couldn't finish. Reynolds slid a sealed envelope onto the workbench. Miss Hart wants you at her residence tomorrow at 7. You'll find the address inside. Don't be late. Then he left his shoes whispering over concrete, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and the sharp sting of humiliation. Jonah stared at the envelope for a long time before pocketing it. That night he reheated leftover spaghetti while May did homework at the kitchen table. She stopped mid-sentence, frowning at his untouched plate. "Dad, are you okay?" He forced a smile. "Just a long day." May's eyes narrowed, not suspicious, just knowing. She had Aaron's way of seeing straight through him. "Is this about that lady from the hospital? The one you told me about?" Jonah froze. "You said she was nice," May continued, "and that she was sick. Did something bad happen?" He sat down slowly. "Someone came to talk to me today. About her." "Are you in trouble?" she whispered. "No," he said quickly. "Not trouble. They think maybe I want something from her, that I'm trying to take advantage." May recoiled as if stung. "But you're not. You wouldn't. That's stupid." Jonah exhaled hard, more tired than angry. "Sometimes sweetheart people see what they expect to see." "That's dumb," May declared, her small fists balled up. "You're a good person. Everyone at school knows you're a good person." The words should have soothed him. Instead, they scared him. Because if the world started looking at him differently, if rumors spread, or people whispered, May's world would change too. Kids at school could be cruel about things they didn't understand. He'd seen it. He wouldn't let that happen to her. Not again. The Hart residence didn't look like anything Jonah had seen outside magazines. 2 acres of glass and stone, perched on a hillside overlooking the city like a queen surveying her kingdom. He scrubbed his hands raw and wore the nicest shirt he owned, but he still felt like he'd walked into the wrong movie. A security guard escorted him inside. Carter Reynolds stood waiting, arms folded, lips thin with displeasure. "You're late," Reynolds said, even though Jonah wasn't. "I'm on time," Jonah replied evenly. Reynolds said nothing. He simply led him down a hallway flooded with warm light and quiet music, then opened a door. Lila sat beside a fireplace in soft gray loungewear, a blanket over her legs. She looked stronger than she had in the hospital, but still fragile, like someone recovering from a storm only she had survived. When she saw him, her face softened. "You came," she breathed. Jonah nodded. "I'm glad you're okay." Reynolds cleared his throat, displeased with the warmth between them. "I'll be outside if you need anything." The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, neither Jonah nor Lila spoke. The fire crackled. The city lights twinkled beyond towering windows. Finally, Lila looked up at him. "I heard you stayed at the hospital until they told you I'd pull through. It wasn't a big deal." "It is to me." She hesitated. "And I know Carter came to your work. I'm sorry for that." Jonah shrugged. "He's doing his job." "He's doing it too aggressively," she said, voice wavering. "He thinks everyone wants something from me. Sometimes he's right." Jonah lowered his gaze. "I don't. I know." Those 2 words landed heavier than anything else that night. But what came next shifted everything. "I want to ask something of you," she said, fingers twisting in her blanket. "And I promise it isn't about money or favors. It's personal." Jonah tensed without meaning to. "Okay," she swallowed. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who doesn't treat me like a glass doll or a checkbook. Carter keeps trying to run the company through me. My board is circling like wolves. And she paused, voice cracking. "I'm scared, Jonah." Something broke open in him at that. She looked at him like she was confessing to a crime. "I don't expect you to fix anything," she continued. "But when I woke up and saw you in that chair, it was the first time in months I didn't feel alone. I was hoping you might visit sometimes. Sit with me. Keep me steady through treatments. Not because of who I am, but because you already saw me at my worst and you didn't run." The simplicity of that request unraveled him more than any accusation Reynolds had thrown at him. Jonah sat beside her quietly. "If that's what you need, I can do that." Relief washed across her face. And that was the moment Carter Reynolds re-entered without knocking, jaw clenched. "Miss Hart, your board call is starting. And Jonah, one last thing." His eyes cut toward Jonah with razor precision. "If anything you do causes Miss Hart stress trouble or public embarrassment, I won't hesitate to remove you from her life. Permanently." Lila stiffened. "Carter." "It's fine," Jonah murmured. But the words burned. He knew men like Reynolds, men who saw the world in hierarchies measured by bank accounts and last names, and he knew this wouldn't be the last time the man tried putting him in his place. 2 days later, the mistreatment found its way to May. Jonah arrived at the school pickup line to find her sitting on the curb, arms crossed tightly, jaw locked. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" She didn't look at him. "Some fifth grader said you're trying to steal money from some rich lady." Jonah's stomach plummeted. "They said you only helped her to get famous," May continued, blinking fast to keep tears back. "And that adults like you do that all the time." She finally looked at him. "Is that true?" Jonah's heart shattered. "No," he whispered. "Absolutely not." But even as he pulled her close, he saw teachers whispering by the doorway, parents staring too long. A few faces turning away as if unsure now whether he was safe, respectable, trustworthy. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a crack spreading. And something inside him knew the pressure wasn't close to ending. Not yet. May clung to him as he stood. "Dad," she whispered. "Why do people say mean things about you when you didn't do anything wrong?" Jonah held her tighter, staring out across the schoolyard as a cold wind swept through. "I don't know, sweetheart," he murmured, "but I'm not going to let this keep happening." Because the line had been crossed, and the storm was only gathering. Jonah didn't sleep the night May came home crying. He sat at the kitchen table long after she drifted off, staring at the glow of the stove clock, listening to the winter wind scrape branches against the siding. His knuckles were still sore from clenching his fists too hard at school. He'd wanted to march into the principal's office, demand names, demand action, but May's small hand on his sleeve had stopped him. "Please don't make it worse, Dad." He wouldn't. He couldn't. But that didn't mean he would let it stand. 2 mornings later, everything reached a breaking point. Lila had called him breathless voice, trembling through the phone to ask if he could come to the Heartline downtown tower. The board was holding an emergency session about her stability, which Jonah knew was code for pushing her aside again. He drove into the city with May in the passenger seat, dropping her at school with a kiss on the forehead and a promise he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. Today's the day things change. By the time he reached the Heartline building, something felt wrong. Not corporate wrong. Wrong. Police cruisers jammed the intersection lights, spinning silently. EMTs were unloading equipment. A crowd had gathered along the sidewalk. Some lifted their phones. Some whispered. Jonah parked fast and ran. The front elevator tower, 20 stories of glass and silver framing, was surrounded by security guards pushing people back. And through the glass, he saw movement near the base of the elevator bank. His stomach dropped. Someone was inside. Trapped. Smoke curled like gray fingers along the ceiling tiles. A fire alarm flashed red overhead, but the PA system wasn't giving instructions. Too much static. Too many overlapping voices. Then Jonah saw her. Lila. Pressed against the inside of a stalled elevator 5 stories up. She was pounding the glass from within, coughing violently, her scarf half off, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. There were 3 other people inside with her, an elderly man slumped on the floor, a young receptionist screaming into her phone, and a delivery guy frantically hitting the emergency button that clearly wasn't working. Carter Reynolds stood in the lobby, face pale, barking orders that didn't seem to matter to anyone. "The fire suppression system malfunctioned," he shouted. "Maintenance is on the way. Nobody move until the fire department arrives." Jonah pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" he demanded. Reynolds whipped around, face tightening at the sight of him. You shouldn't be here." Jonah grabbed his arm. "What happened?" "The elevator shorted when the generator overloaded." Reynolds snapped. "There's a small electrical fire in the shaft. The sprinklers failed. The emergency brakes jammed." He swallowed hard. "She's trapped. How long until fire rescue gets here?" Reynolds hesitated. "How long? They're 10 minutes out." 10 minutes. In a sealed metal box filling with smoke. Jonah looked up again. Lila pressed her face against the window, searching the crowd. When she spotted him, her shoulders collapsed in visible relief. She mouthed something. "Help me." He wasn't the same man he'd been years ago, the one who could sprint into burning rubble without thinking. But he knew what smoke inhalation looked like. He knew the timing when lungs began to fail. He knew how fast a small fire could turn an elevator into a steel coffin. She didn't have 10 minutes. He heard May's voice in his head, steady, innocent, believing, "You're a good person." And behind that, Aaron's voice, softer, older, "If you can help, you help." That's who you are. Jonah turned to the nearest guard. "Where's the maintenance access to the shaft?" "You can't go in there," the guard stammered. "It's too dangerous." The smoke. Where Jonah repeated, calm but absolute. Reynolds stepped forward, jaw clenched. "If you go in there and something happens to you, it becomes a liability for this company." Jonah stared at him. "If she dies, that becomes a liability too." Then he pushed past him. A maintenance worker led him to a service door behind the lobby cafe. Smoke snaked out from the seams, thin but hot, rubbing raw against his throat as soon as he breathed it. "Ladder goes straight to the emergency walkway," the worker shouted over the alarm. 30 feet up. You'll see the lift under the elevator car. Don't lean too far." Jonah nodded and stepped inside. The door clanged shut behind him. The shaft swallowed sound. It was hotter than he expected, heat rolling upward like an angry tide. Smoke clung thick against the walls, tasting like burnt plastic. The metal ladder rumbled from the electrical fire somewhere below, and Jonah had to grip hard to counter a sudden yank of vertigo. He climbed anyway. He climbed because he remembered carrying wounded soldiers across sand that felt like fire. He remembered Aaron gasping for air in an ICU room he couldn't fix. He remembered May crying beside the schoolyard fence. He climbed because giving up was never an option. Not then, not now. Halfway up, he heard coughing through the elevator vent. Hard, ragged coughing. He pushed faster. By the time he reached the emergency walkway, his arms shook. but the sight above him sent a surge of adrenaline through every nerve. The elevator hung crooked on partially engaged brakes. The corner tilted downward like the whole thing had been kicked. Smoke poured through vents along its underside. A small access panel at the bottom glowed cherry-red metal warping from heat. "Lila!" he shouted, pounding on the underside. Her voice came faint through the gap. "Jonah." That was enough. He wedged his fingers into the panel seam, braced his boots on the slippery steel, and pulled. But the heat bit into his palms. He hissed and jerked back. The maintenance worker's tool bag lay on the walkway rail. Jonah grabbed a pry bar, jammed it into the seam, and leaned his entire weight on it. The panel groaned, shifted, popped open with a scream of metal. Smoke blasted out in a choking wave. Jonah coughed and climbed up onto the narrow beam directly beneath the hatch. He could see faces now blurry through the smoke, but terrified. The receptionist was crouched over the elderly man, who lay motionless. "Is he breathing?" Jonah shouted. Barely her voice cracked. Jonah shoved half his body up into the opening. "Pass him down." It took everything he had to help guide the man through the hole, lowering him into his arms while trying not to slip off the beam. Heat licked at his neck. Sweat streaked down his back. He carried the man to the walkway, laid him gently on the metal grate, checked a pulse. Weak but present. One down. He turned back toward the hatch. The receptionist and delivery guy followed next, each one, trembling, coughing hard, gripping his arms like he was a lifeline. Then it was just Lila. She stood near the hatch, clutching the wall for support. Her lips were blue, her eyes glassy. Each breath rattled. "Come on," Jonah said softly. "I've got you." Smoke rolled through the car. Sparks burst behind her. Her knees buckled. He reached in fast, grabbing under her arms, hauling her toward him as she coughed into his shoulder. Her fingers dug weakly into his shirt. She weighed almost nothing, like lifting smoke itself. Then a deafening crack. The elevator jerked downward an inch. Jonah's boots slipped on the beam. He slammed his shoulder against the underside of the car to brace himself, teeth rattling. He heard shouts far below, guards, firefighters, someone screaming his name. But he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. He yanked Lila free and fell backward onto the walkway, protecting her body with his. The elevator groaned again, then settled brakes, screeching. He rolled onto his side, coughing violently. Lila lay beside him, chest heaving, eyes half open but conscious. "Jonah," she rasped. He brushed soot from her cheek. "You're okay. You're okay." Boots thundered toward them as firefighters reached the walkway oxygen tanks, hissing. One of them stopped short, staring in disbelief. "You got them all out?" he demanded. Jonah didn't answer. He was too busy making sure Lila was breathing steadily, his fingers shaking as he held her hand. The firefighter looked between Jonah, the rescued group, and the damaged elevator car dangling overhead. Then he shook his head with a stunned laugh. "Hell," he said. "Whoever you are, you just saved 4 lives." 3 minutes later, they emerged into the lobby to a wall of cameras. The crowd had grown employees, executives, bystanders pressed against the glass walls. Carter Reynolds stood frozen near the reception desk, shock carved into every angle of his face. Lila leaned against Jonah as EMTs stabilized her. Her hand clutched his sleeve with stubborn strength. When she saw the board members gathered near the conference doors, one of them mid-sentence complaining loudly about liability, she lifted her chin. "You want to know if I'm capable of leading this company?" she said, voice hoarse but unwavering. "Ask the man who risked his life while the rest of you watched." Every camera pivoted toward him. Jonah's burned hands throbbed. His throat ached from smoke. His clothes were streaked with soot. But for once he didn't shrink back. He met their gaze, and every pair of eyes told the same story. They'd underestimated him. They'd misjudged him. They'd never seen the strength behind the grease-stained uniform. Lila squeezed his hand just once, but enough to anchor him. Something had changed. Not just for her. Not just for him. For everyone watching. The lobby still smelled like burnt wiring and adrenaline when Jonah stepped out of the stairwell, flanked by firefighters and EMTs. People scattered to make room for the stretcher carrying Lila, but their eyes stayed locked on Jonah, wide stunned, searching for something to latch onto after witnessing what no one had been able to process fast enough. A few employees clapped without meaning to. Others simply stared, their expressions flickering between awe and disbelief. Jonah wasn't focused on any of them. He kept his attention on Lila, watching her grip the side rail of the stretcher with a trembling hand, forcing each breath through lungs that still rattled with leftover smoke. She looked up at him. He nodded once, the silent promise he'd been giving her since the night in his van. "I'm here. You're not alone." The EMTs rolled her toward the ambulance bay, but Jonah didn't follow. Not yet. He needed a second, just a second, to catch his breath, find his bearings, and understand what he'd just walked through. That's when Carter Reynolds finally approached. The COO didn't bark orders this time. He didn't frown or sneer or narrow his eyes like Jonah was some uninvited guest who'd wandered into a world he didn't belong in. He approached slowly, carefully, as if stepping toward something he wasn't sure he deserved to be near. Jonah, Carter said, voice low, "We need to talk." Jonah expected another accusation, another warning, another line about liability or risk or professionalism. Instead, Carter's gaze drifted to Jonah's burned hands, swollen and angry red. His throat tightened. "You shouldn't be standing." "I'm fine," Jonah said. "You're not." Jonah didn't argue, didn't need to. The truth sat between them like smoke that hadn't cleared. Employees began to whisper. "Is he a firefighter?" "No." "Someone said he used to be military. Did you see how he lifted her? That wasn't luck." Carter heard it all. He straightened, eyes narrowing, not with judgment, but with realization. "You knew exactly what to do in that shaft," he said slowly. "You weren't guessing. You weren't improvising. You moved like someone who's done this before." Jonah didn't respond. He rarely talked about his service. Not because he was ashamed, but because the memories clung to him like shadows loud when he didn't want them silent when he needed answers. Carter stepped closer. "Who are you?" Jonah thought about lying. He thought about shrugging it off. But something about the moment, the devastation still clinging to the building, the shock trembling in his muscles, the memory of Lila gasping for air, made him drop his guard. He inhaled once through scorched lungs. "I was an army medic," he said. "Tour in Afghanistan. Improvised rescue was part of it. Pulling people out of collapsed structures, burning vehicles, whatever was falling apart." Carter blinked, not dramatically, not theatrically. He blinked like a man resetting his understanding of the world. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked quietly. "You never asked," Jonah replied. Carter exhaled through his nose, a slow, heavy release of something that had been lodged in his chest. Shame, maybe. Regret. Humility. He looked away, jaw tightening before he forced himself to meet Jonah's gaze again. "I misjudged you," he said. "I assumed you were here for something. Money, influence, headlines." Jonah scraped a hand down his face. "Yeah, I noticed." Carter swallowed. "And also, I thought you were a danger, that you'd complicate things for her." "That part you got right," Jonah said quietly. "I complicate things just by being who I am." Carter didn't deny it, but his voice softened. "Today you saved her life, and 3 others, and you did it without hesitation. He paused. I'm not used to being wrong, Jonah. But I was. Completely. Jonah didn't accept the apology out loud, but the stiffness in his shoulders eased just an inch. A new voice cut through the tension. Mr. Reynolds, a man in a gray suit. The chair of the board stepped forward with several directors in tow, all of them badly shaken. We need to speak with you, the man said, then glanced at Jonah. Both of you. Carter's brow furrowed. Now she needs... This concerns Miss Hart, the man insisted, and Heartline as a whole. Jonah followed them to a conference room near the back of the lobby, a space with glass walls and too bright lighting still echoing with the last emergency announcements. The board members took their seats stiffly, like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. One woman leaned forward, Mr. Reeves. We're told you executed a high-risk extraction inside an active elevator shaft, without equipment, without support, and without instruction. Jonah shifted. People were dying. That's not our point, another director said. He cleared his throat. Our point is that you did what our own trained personnel hesitated to do. Jonah didn't like where this was heading. Praise had never sat well with him. It made him feel seen in ways he didn't want to be seen. Carter crossed his arms. What exactly are you suggesting? The board chair folded his hands. We've been discussing Miss Hart's leadership behind closed doors for months. Some of us doubted her resilience, her stability, her capacity to lead this company through crisis. Jonah's jaw tightened. Then you don't know her at all? No, the man said gently. We didn't. He gestured toward the lobby outside, where staff were still gathered, still shaken, still staring toward the ambulance bay, like they weren't sure what world they'd stepped into. Everyone just watched their CEO nearly die, the board chair continued. Everyone just watched one man who had nothing to gain risk his life to save hers. We will not forget that. Jonah stiffened. I didn't do it for you. We know, the woman at the table said. That's why it matters. Carter's eyes flicked sideways at Jonah, something like respect finally settling behind his gaze. The board chair leaned forward, voice lower. Miss Hart will wake up in the hospital soon. When she does, she'll face decisions, legal ones, medical ones, corporate ones. Some will be devastating. Some will decide the future of this company. He hesitated. And she will need someone she can trust. Desperately. Jonah's heartbeat thudded heavier. She already has someone, the woman said. But until today, we didn't understand who that someone really was. A cold sweat prickled Jonah's neck. What are you asking me? He said. The man slid a card across the table. Heartline's executive crest embossed in gold. Miss Hart has a standing authority to appoint an interim advisor with full access to corporate safety, security, and operations, he said. We want you to serve in that role until she recovers. Jonah stared at the card like it was a grenade. You want me to work for Heartline? In a capacity that allows you to stay close to her, the man clarified. Not for optics, for protection. Today made it clear she trusts you more than anyone. And more than that. His voice softened. Today proved you are someone worth trusting. A long silence settled over the room. People had doubted him his whole life, teachers, employers, parents at May's school. Carter had dismissed him. The board had dismissed him. The world had taught him that a man covered in grease scraping by on overtime didn't belong next to a billionaire heiress. And yet here they were. Here they were offering him the one thing he'd stopped believing he would ever earn again. Respect. Real respect. Jonah rubbed his thumb over the edge of the business card. feeling the raised gold lettering. He thought of May and the teasing she'd endured. He thought of Lila coughing in the elevator. He thought of Erin's picture on the dresser, watching with that quiet look she used to give him when she knew he was standing at a crossroads. He knew what mattered. He knew why he'd climbed that shaft. He knew what he wanted to protect. "Before I answer," Jonah said quietly, voice steady, even as his pulse hammered. "I need to ask one thing." All eyes sharpened. "No more lies," he said. "No more games. No more treating her like she's fragile, or me like I'm a liability." He lifted his head. "If I do this, it's for her. Not for you. Not for your board. Not for your headlines." The board chair nodded slowly. "That," he said, "is exactly why you're the right person." Jonah didn't accept the role. Not yet. But when he walked out of the conference room and spotted May running toward him, her backpack bouncing, her eyes still red from yesterday's tears, and Lila being lifted into the ambulance, with her hand reaching out toward him instinctively, he realized what the decision would be. He just hadn't said it aloud yet. The stakes had shifted. The world had changed. And Jonah Reeves was no longer a man the company could afford to underestimate. In the next chapter, the real choice would land in his hands, and whatever he decided would alter every life connected to Heartline Resorts, especially Lila's, and especially May's. The morning after the elevator rescue, Jonah woke to a phone vibrating across his nightstand. May was still sleeping on the couch. She'd insisted she wasn't leaving his side that night, and soft daylight spilled through the blinds. The caller ID read, "Heartline Resorts, Executive Office." He braced for complications, for lawyers, for fallout. Instead, it was Carter Reynolds. His voice was different now, calmer, smaller. "Miss Hart is awake," Carter said. "She's asking for you and Jonah. The board wants to give a statement. You should hear it in person." When Jonah arrived at the hospital that afternoon, no one glared or whispered the way they once had. Nurses nodded as he passed. A receptionist smiled and said, "You're the man who pulled them out, aren't you?" Jonah muttered something awkward and kept walking. Inside Lila's room, it felt like the world softened around them. She was pale but steady, sitting up with a blanket tucked around her legs. Her eyes brightened the moment she saw him. "There you are," she whispered. He sat beside her, and for a long moment they didn't speak. She just held his hand with quiet gratitude. Finally, she said, "I'm told you climbed into a burning elevator shaft. For me." Jonah swallowed, uncomfortable with praise. "I didn't think. I just moved." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." Carter was waiting outside the room when Jonah stepped into the hall. The man who once seemed carved out of steel now looked human, humbled. "I owe you an apology," Carter said, "for everything I assumed, and everything I said." Jonah nodded, letting the words settle. "Thank you." "And the board," Carter continued, "would like you to formally accept the position we discussed. Safety and Operations Advisor. Full pay. Benefits. A schedule you can set around your daughter's needs." He paused. "It isn't charity. It's trust." Jonah's first instinct was to refuse. Too big, too strange, too far from the life he'd built in grease and diesel fumes. Then he remembered May walking out of school with her head down. He remembered how people judged without knowing a thing about him. And he remembered what Lila looked like in that elevator, terrified, alone, reaching for help. Maybe he could do more. Maybe he could be more. "I'll try it," he said quietly. "On one condition." Carter raised an eyebrow. "No one hides anything from her again," Jonah said, nodding toward Lila's room. "No corporate games, No secrets? Carter didn't hesitate. Agreed. 2 months later, winter melted into a wet Missouri spring, and life began to take a shape Jonah hadn't expected. He still fixed buses in the mornings. He refused to abandon the kids or the co-workers who depended on him. But in the afternoons, he walked into Heartline's headquarters wearing a badge with his name etched in clean silver. Not Jonah Reeves mechanic, not Jonah Reeves rideshare driver, but Jonah Reeves advisor to the CEO. The title never really mattered to him, but the respect did. Lila recovered slowly. Some days she met with the board, hair covered with a soft scarf voice, steady as she outlined safety reforms Jonah proposed. Other days, she was too weak to leave her penthouse, so Jonah sat with her by the window, watching the city lights flicker on like fireflies across a steel landscape. They didn't call it a relationship. They didn't need to. But May noticed the way Lila's face lit when Jonah entered a room, and Jonah noticed the way May slipped her hand into Lila's without hesitation. Even Carter softened, becoming less a gatekeeper and more a trusted guard dog, still stern, but no longer suspicious. He listened when Jonah spoke. He asked for opinions. He apologized when he crossed lines. The company shifted too. Instead of executives hiding behind closed doors, they began walkthroughs with staff. Fire protocols changed. Elevator inspections doubled. They created a crisis response training program, written not by a consultant, but by Jonah. Employees called him Reeves sometimes, Coach, sometimes the guy who saved the boss. He never corrected them. But when May drew a hand-drawn picture of him pulling people out of the elevator and taped it to the fridge, that was the only recognition he kept framed. By early summer, Heartline hosted a small ceremony in the rooftop garden of the downtown tower. Nothing flashy. No reporters, just employees and families. Lila sat beneath a pavilion draped in white lights, color back in her cheeks, now eyes bright with the kind of energy she had the night they first met. Jonah stood beside her as Carter gave a short speech. And this company is different today because one man refused to walk away, Carter said. He didn't have a title. He didn't have authority. He didn't have the right suit or the right pedigree, but he had courage, and he had heart. People turned toward Jonah with warmth, not pity, not awe, but recognition. Lila squeezed his hand once, and when he glanced at her, she looked proud in a way he hadn't felt in years. But the moment that hit him hardest wasn't the applause. It was when May climbed onto the small stage, marched straight to the microphone, and said in her clear, determined voice, "My dad's always been a hero. The rest of you just didn't know it." The garden fell quiet. Jonah had to look away to keep from breaking. A year later, life didn't look perfect, but it looked whole. Jonah still worked 2 jobs, not because he had to, but because he liked keeping one foot in the world that raised him. May had a bedroom big enough to paint bright blue, just like she asked for. She had a dog now, too, an old floppy-eared rescue mutt named Buster, who drooled on every piece of furniture. And Lila, she was stronger. Not cured. Not every story gets that clean an ending, but alive, present, steady. She split her time between treatments, board meetings, and long walks with Jonah along the riverfront where her life had nearly ended. The company thrived under new safety standards. The elevator incident became a training model, not a scandal. Employees took pride in working for a company that valued real courage over corporate polish. And Jonah learned something he'd forgotten since losing Aaron. It was still possible to love a life rebuilt from ashes. Some nights, Jonah sat on the back porch watching May chase Buster across the yard, listening to Lila laugh softly beside him. And he'd realize that the world didn't reward him because he was extraordinary. It rewarded him because he chose to show up again and again when someone needed him most. In the end, that's all a hero ever really is. A person who refuses to walk away